I always prided myself on being the heart of our family. For 35 years, I had been the one hosting Sunday dinners, remembering birthdays, and keeping everyone connected. But something changed when my son Brandon married Melissa 3 years ago. At first, I thought we'd become the best of friends. She seemed sweet during their dating years, always smiling when I spoke and asking about my day. The shift happened gradually at family gatherings. I'd walk into a room where Melissa was chatting with my sister and/or my other daughter-in-law Karen, and suddenly the conversation would stop. Not pause, stop completely. Then Melissa would redirect the talk to something that excluded me entirely. When I tried to jump in with a comment or story, she'd either change the subject or act like I hadn't spoken at all. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she was just nervous around me. Maybe I had said something wrong without realizing it. I kept telling myself it was nothing more than awkwardness between two women still getting to know each other. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something wasn't right. I had no idea this was just the beginning of feeling invisible in my own family. The polite smile became Melissa's signature weapon. Every time I opened my mouth at family events, she'd flash this perfect, practiced smile that never reached her eyes. It was the kind of smile you give a stranger when you're being polite but want them to go away. I started to dread that smile more than outright rudeness. During Brandon's birthday party last spring, I was telling everyone about the photo album I'd made for him filled with childhood pictures. Melissa listened with that same frozen smile, nodding at all the right moments. But when I finished, she immediately launched into a story about their recent vacation, completely dismissing what I'd just shared. Everyone turned their attention to her, leaving my photo album forgotten on the coffee table. The worst part wasn't the smile itself, it was how genuine. When I called Sophie over to see the new doll I'd brought her, she looked at Melissa first, as if asking permission. The spontaneous affection they'd always shown me was being replaced by hesitation and uncertainty. The breaking point came during Easter brunch. I was sitting alone on the porch when Sophie ran outside, saw me, and immediately turned around to go back inside. Through the window, I heard her tell Melissa, "Grandma looks sad. Should I go talk to her?" Melissa's response was a quiet, "Maybe later, sweetie. Come help mommy in the kitchen instead." My own grandchildren were learning to avoid me. They were picking up on their mother's signals and treating me like someone to be cautious around. The love they once showered on me was being systematically erased, replaced by the same polite distance their mother showed. I couldn't understand why she was poisoning them against me, and I couldn't bear to watch it continue. Family gatherings became torture chambers disguised as celebrations. I'd arrive with homemade dishes and genuine excitement, only to spend hours feeling like a ghost haunting my own family. While Melissa effortlessly commanded attention, sharing stories, and laughing with everyone, I sat in corners watching life happen around me. During my daughter Kelly's promotion party, I found myself standing alone by the kitchen island while Melissa held court in the living room. She was describing her new job at the marketing firm, gesturing animatedly while everyone listened with rapt attention. When I tried to join the conversation by mentioning my own work experience in marketing, the group somehow dispersed within minutes, leaving me talking to empty air. The isolation was suffocating. These were my people, my children, my siblings, my grandchildren, yet I felt like an outsider looking in through glass. I'd watch Melissa receive the warm welcomes and genuine interest that had once been mine. She'd taken my place as the family's focal point, and somehow I'd become the inconvenient relative everyone tolerated but no one really wanted around. I started arriving later and leaving earlier, hoping to minimize the pain. But even shortened visits felt endless when you're surrounded by people who act like you don't exist. I wondered if my own son could see what was happening, or if he was too blinded by love to notice how his wife was systematically erasing his mother from their family. The silence from my family hurt almost as much as Melissa's coldness. My son Brandon, whom I'd raised to be respectful and observant, seemed completely blind to what was happening. When I tried to bring up Melissa's behavior gently, he'd brush off my concerns with explanations like, "She's just stressed from work," or "You're reading too much into things, Mom." I began to question my own perceptions. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I was imagining the slight edge in her voice when she spoke to me, or the way conversations died when I entered a room. But the knot in my stomach during every family event told me otherwise. The dread I felt before gatherings wasn't imaginary. At Brandon's work barbecue, I watched Melissa charm his colleagues while barely acknowledging my presence. When someone asked about his family, she talked about her parents, her sister, even their dog, but never mentioned me. It was as if I didn't exist in their story. When I later mentioned feeling left out, Brandon sighed and said, "Mom, not everything is about you." That comment stung more than all of Melissa's calculated coldness. My own son was dismissing my feelings and making me feel selfish for wanting basic recognition. I swallowed my hurt in silence, determined not to be the difficult mother-in-law everyone complains about. But inside, I was drowning in loneliness and starting to realize that I was the only one fighting for my place in this family. Something fundamental shifted inside me the morning after Kelly's baby shower. I'd spent the entire event being ignored while Melissa played the perfect future aunt, offering advice and sharing parenting tips as if she were the family matriarch. When I tried to share my own experiences raising 4 children, Melissa had actually interrupted me to ask Kelly about nursery colors. I sat in my kitchen the next morning, coffee growing cold in my hands, and realized I was done. Done making excuses for her behavior. Done hoping things would improve. Done begging for scraps of attention from people who seemed determined not to give them. The woman I'd been, the peacekeeper who swallowed hurt to avoid conflict, was finished. For too long, I'd been playing by rules that only applied to me. While Melissa could be rude and dismissive without consequence, I was expected to smile and accept it gracefully. While she could command attention and respect, I was supposed to fade quietly into the background. The unfairness of it all finally hit me with crystal clarity. I wasn't going to disappear just because she wanted me to. I wasn't going to continue attending gatherings where I felt like an unwelcome stranger. If Melissa wanted to treat me like I was already dead to the family, then perhaps it was time to make that treatment impossible to ignore. A plan began forming in my mind, something that would force her to confront exactly what she'd been doing to me. The idea came to me while I was organizing my filing cabinet and came across my late husband's funeral programs. The elegant black border and formal language sparked something inside me. If Melissa insisted on treating me like I was dead at family functions, then maybe I should give her exactly what she seemed to want. I spent 2 hours crafting the perfect invitation. It looked professional, cream-colored cardstock with elegant black lettering that read, "You are cordially invited to attend the funeral service of," followed by my name. The date was set for the following Saturday, the same day as Brandon's company picnic that the whole family would be attending. But the real message was in the note I attached. "Since you act like I'm already dead at family gatherings, I thought I'd save you the trouble." I read it over several times, making sure every word carried the weight I intended. This wasn't just about shocking her, it was about holding up a mirror to her behavior and forcing her to see exactly what she'd been doing. I sealed the envelope carefully, my hand steady despite my racing heart. This single piece of paper would either wake her up to the pain she'd caused or prove once and for all that she truly didn't care about my feelings. Either way, I'd finally know where I stood. I could already imagine the look of shock on her face when she opened it, and for the first time in months, that thought brought me satisfaction instead of dread. I mailed the invitation on Tuesday morning, timing it so Melissa would receive it on Thursday, 2 days before Brandon's company picnic. I wanted her to have time to process what I'd done but not enough time to prepare some elaborate response. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Every hour that passed felt like a small victory and a terrifying risk rolled into one. Thursday evening, my phone stayed silent. Friday came and went without a word. I imagined Melissa opening the mailbox, sorting through bills and advertisements, then stopping cold when she saw the formal envelope addressed to her. Did her hands shake when she read my message? Did she feel even a fraction of the hurt and confusion I'd experienced for months? Part of me expected an angry phone call immediately. Part of me hoped for a tearful apology. But the silence was somehow worse than either reaction would have been. It meant she was thinking, processing, maybe even discussing it with Brandon. The waiting gave me time to second-guess myself. Had I gone too far? Was this the right way to handle the situation? But then I remembered all the times I'd felt invisible at family gatherings, all the conversations that stopped when I walked into a room, all the ways she'd made me feel unwelcome in my own family. My anger solidified into determination. Whatever her reaction would be, at least I'd finally made it impossible for her to ignore me or pretend she didn't understand how her behavior affected me. Brandon called Saturday morning, just hours before his company picnic. His voice was tight with anger and confusion when he said, "Mom, we need to talk about this letter you sent Melissa." What were you thinking? I'd prepared for this conversation, but hearing the accusation in my son's voice still made my heart race. "I was thinking about how your wife has been treating me for the past 2 years, I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I was thinking about how invisible I've become at every family gathering." "She said you sent her a funeral invitation." "A funeral invitation, Mom. Do you understand how inappropriate that is?" His disappointment was clear, and I felt a familiar urge to apologize and smooth things over. But I pushed it down. "Do you understand how inappropriate it is to ignore your mother-in-law at every family event?" I shot back. "To change the subject every time she tries to speak? To teach your children to avoid their grandmother?" There was a long pause. For a moment, I thought I might be getting through to him. Then he sighed heavily. "Mom, I think you're exaggerating. Melissa's not perfect, but she's not deliberately mean to you. Maybe you're being too sensitive about this." The words hit me like a slap. My own son was dismissing my pain and defending the woman who'd been systematically excluding me from our family. The conversation I'd hoped would open his eyes was instead revealing just how blind he'd chosen to be. "Too sensitive?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Brandon, when was the last time your wife had a real conversation with me? When was the last time she asked about my day or showed any interest in my life?" I could hear him struggling to come up with an answer. She's busy, Mom. She works full-time, she's managing the kids' schedules. She's not deliberately ignoring you." Then explain why conversations stop when I enter a room. Explain why Alex asked Sophie to be quiet around Grandma because Mommy doesn't like loud noises near me. Explain why I'm never included in the photos she posts on social media from family events. Another long silence. I pressed on, knowing this might be my only chance to make him understand. "I raised you to notice when people are being excluded. I taught you to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Where is that man now?" "This is different," he said quietly. "This is my wife. And I'm your mother," I replied. "The woman who loved you before anyone else did. The woman who sacrificed years of her life to give you everything you needed. Doesn't that count for something?" When he spoke again, his voice was defensive rather than understanding. "Of course it counts. But you can't send funeral invitations to my wife because you feel left out. That's not normal behavior, Mom." I realized then that this conversation wouldn't change anything. Brandon had already chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. The half-hearted attempt to explain Melissa's behavior told me everything I needed to know about where his loyalties lay. The weeks following Brandon's call were filled with an uncomfortable silence that hung over every family interaction. Melissa avoided me more than ever, and Brandon acted like our conversation had never happened. Family group texts continued without my input, plans were made without consulting me, and life moved forward as if I'd never sent that invitation at all. I stopped attending the smaller gatherings. The impromptu dinners and casual get-togethers where my absence might not be immediately noticed. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, I'd make it easier for them. The irony wasn't lost on me that avoiding them felt more peaceful than trying to be included. Kelly called one evening to ask why I'd missed her son's baseball game. "I didn't know I was invited," I told her honestly. "Nobody mentioned it to me." "Mom, you don't need a formal invitation to your grandson's games. You know you're always welcome." But that was the problem, I didn't know I was welcome. Not anymore. The family dynamics had shifted so gradually that what once felt natural now felt presumptuous. I found myself second-guessing every interaction, wondering if my presence was actually wanted or merely tolerated. The distance between us was growing wider, and I wasn't sure if anyone besides me even noticed. My absence from family events was becoming as invisible as my presence had been. The realization that my family could function perfectly well without me was both liberating and heartbreaking. At least now the rejection was honest instead of hidden behind polite smiles and forced conversations. My decision to send the funeral invitation created ripples throughout our extended family that I hadn't anticipated. Phone calls started coming from relatives who'd heard different versions of the story. Some were supportive, others were shocked, and a few were openly critical of my methods. My sister called first. "Helen, what on earth were you thinking? A funeral invitation? That's just cruel. Is it crueler than being ignored at every family gathering for 2 years?" I asked. "Is it crueler than watching my grandchildren learn to avoid me because their mother treats me like an inconvenience?" And was quiet for a moment. I had no idea it was that bad. "Because nobody pays attention unless someone makes them," I replied. I tried handling it quietly, and nobody noticed. At least now people are talking about it. My nephew called to express his support. "Aunt Helen, I've seen how Melissa treats you at family parties. I never knew how to bring it up, but you're right, she's been really cold to you." But for every call of support, there was another expressing concern about my mental state or my dramatic response. Melissa's friends in the family painted me as the unreasonable mother-in-law who couldn't accept that her son was married. The narrative was being controlled by those who hadn't witnessed years of subtle exclusion and calculated coldness. The family was taking sides, some quietly, others more openly. What I'd hoped would be a wake-up call was becoming a full-scale family drama with me cast as either the victim or the villain, depending on who was telling the story. The most surprising support came from my niece Jessica, who called me 3 weeks after the invitation incident. She'd been silent during all the family discussions, and I'd assumed she was Team Melissa like most of the younger relatives. "Aunt Helen, I need to tell you something," she said nervously. "I've been watching Melissa's behavior toward you for over a year now, and I've felt sick about not saying anything." My heart jumped. Finally, someone who'd witnessed what I'd been experiencing. "At Cousin Mike's wedding last summer, I watched her literally turn her back to you when you tried to join the conversation about wedding planning. When you walked away, she rolled her eyes and made a comment about some people not knowing when they're not wanted. The validation felt like cool water on a burn. Someone else had seen it. Someone else understood that this wasn't all in my head. I've seen her signal to the kids to come away when you're trying to interact with them. I've watched her monopolize conversations specifically to keep you out. I should have said something sooner, but I didn't want to cause family drama." "Well, the drama's already here now," I said with a bitter laugh. Jessica's voice was firm when she replied, "Maybe it needed to be. Maybe some things are worth fighting for." Her words gave me strength I hadn't felt in months. At least one person in this family understood that respect and inclusion weren't too much to ask for. I made the difficult decision to stop attending family gatherings entirely. If my presence made everyone uncomfortable and my absence went unnoticed, then the choice was clear. I would no longer subject myself to the pain of feeling unwelcome in my own family. The first event I skipped was my grandson Alex's soccer championship game. It broke my heart to miss it, but I couldn't bear another afternoon of standing alone on the sidelines while Melissa chatted with other parents and my son acted like I wasn't there. When Kelly called to ask why I hadn't come, I was honest. Because I'm tired of feeling invisible. Because I'm tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not. Because I'd rather be alone than feel lonely in a crowd of people who are supposed to love me. The conversation was difficult, but necessary. Kelly admitted she'd noticed some tension but hadn't realized how badly I was being treated. "Mom, you can't just disappear from our lives. The kids need their grandmother." "Then maybe someone should have thought about that before allowing their mother to be treated like an unwanted stranger," I replied. My absence from family events was my way of protecting myself, but it was also a test. Would anyone miss me enough to address the real problem? Would anyone care enough to demand better treatment for me? Or would they simply adjust to my absence and move on without me? The silence that followed my withdrawal told me everything I needed to know about my value to this family. Months passed with minimal contact from Brandon or Melissa. Occasionally, Kelly would call to update me on family news or invite me to smaller gatherings, but the big events continued without me. I heard about birthday parties through social media posts and learned about family developments through other relatives. The isolation was lonely, but it was honestly lonelier than the exclusion I'd experienced at family gatherings. At least now I wasn't actively being ignored, I was simply absent. There was a strange peace in knowing where I stood rather than constantly hoping for inclusion that never came. I began to doubt whether my dramatic gesture had been the right choice. Maybe I should have tried harder to work things out quietly. Maybe I should have been more patient with Melissa's personality quirks. Maybe I'd thrown away my family relationships over misunderstandings and hurt feelings. But then I'd remember Alex looking to his mother for permission before hugging me. I'd remember Sophie turning away when she saw me sitting alone. I'd remember the countless conversations that died when I approached and the photos I was never included in. The doubt would fade, replaced by the certainty that I'd deserved better treatment than I'd received. Late one Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with a text message that would change everything. It was from Brandon. "We need to talk. Can you meet with me and Melissa this weekend?" The message I'd been waiting for had finally arrived. I stared at Brandon's text for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to make them wait the way I'd been waiting for acknowledgement and respect. But the mother in me, the part that still loved my son despite everything, couldn't resist the possibility of resolution. Saturday afternoon, 2 p.m., at the coffee shop on Main Street, I texted back. I chose a public place deliberately, somewhere we'd have to keep our voices down and our emotions in check. The days leading up to the meeting felt endless. I rehearsed conversations in my head, imagining everything from heartfelt apologies to defensive accusations. I prepared myself for the possibility that this was just another attempt to make me the problem, to paint my reaction as unreasonable while ignoring the behavior that had prompted it. When Saturday arrived, I dressed carefully in my favorite blue blouse and the pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. I wanted to look composed and dignified, not like the unhinged mother-in-law they might be expecting. I arrived at the coffee shop first and chose a corner table where we could speak privately. When Brandon and Melissa walked in together, I noticed immediately that Melissa looked nervous, not defiant or angry as I'd expected, but genuinely uncomfortable. Brandon looked tired, like he'd been dealing with this issue for weeks. They sat down across from me, and for a moment, nobody spoke. The weight of months of tension and hurt feelings filled the space between us. Finally, Brandon cleared his throat and began the conversation I'd been waiting for. "Mom, I owe you an apology," Brandon said, his voice serious and slightly strained. "I should have listened to you months ago instead of dismissing your concerns. I should have paid more attention to what was happening at family gatherings." The words I'd longed to hear were finally being spoken, but I remained cautious. Words were easy, changed behavior was what mattered. "I've been blind to how Melissa's been treating you," he continued. "I thought you were being overly sensitive, but I was wrong. You weren't imagining things." Melissa shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know I've been unfair to you, Helen. I know I've made you feel unwelcome, and I'm sorry." The apology sounded genuine, but I needed to understand the why behind her behavior. What I don't understand is what I did to deserve that treatment. What did I do to make you dislike me so much? Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't do anything wrong. That's the worst part. I was jealous of the relationship you had with Brandon and the kids. I felt like I could never measure up to you in their eyes." The admission caught me off guard. "Jealous of me? You're this amazing mother and grandmother who everyone adores. You have all these stories about Brandon's childhood, all this history with the family. I felt like an outsider looking in, and instead of trying to build a relationship with you, I pushed you away." Her explanation didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me understand it. As Melissa continued talking, more truths emerged. "When we first got married, I heard Brandon talking to his friends about how perfect you were, how you'd set the bar so high for wives and mothers. Instead of seeing that as something to aspire to, I felt intimidated and resentful. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. I know this sounds ridiculous, but I was afraid that if you and I became close, Brandon would compare us and find me lacking. So I kept my distance, and when that felt awkward, I started being cold. Cold is an understatement, I said, finally finding my voice. You made me feel like an unwelcome stranger in my own family. You taught my grandchildren to avoid me. I know, she whispered. The kids thing, that wasn't intentional at first. But when Alex asked me why you looked sad all the time, I panicked. I didn't know how to explain the tension without admitting I was the cause of it. Brandon leaned forward. I should have seen what was happening. When you tried to tell me, I should have listened instead of making excuses for behavior I hadn't even bothered to notice. The conversation was painful but necessary. For the first time in 2 years, we were being completely honest about the dynamics that had been destroying our family relationships. But honesty was just the first step. The real question was whether genuine change was possible. I looked at both of them carefully before responding. I appreciate your apologies, but I need to know this isn't just about making yourselves feel better. The raw honesty in Melissa's voice as she continued her confession surprised me. For the first time since I'd known her, the polite mask had completely fallen away, and I was seeing the real person underneath, insecure, defensive, and genuinely remorseful. I realize now that I was so focused on protecting myself from feeling inadequate that I never considered how much I was hurting you, she said. When I got that invitation, I was shocked and angry at first. But then I really thought about it, and I realized you were right. I had been treating you like you were invisible. She paused, struggling with her words. The funeral invitation was harsh, but it was also accurate. I had to face the fact that I'd been so cruel to you that you felt like you might as well be dead to the family. Brandon reached across the table and touched my hand. Mom, I'm ashamed that it took a funeral invitation to make me see what was right in front of me. I watched my wife exclude my mother from family conversations and told myself she was just shy or overwhelmed. I wasn't shy, Melissa interjected. I was being deliberately exclusive because I was scared and immature. There's no excuse for that. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. The defensiveness I'd expected wasn't there. Instead, I was hearing genuine accountability and what sounded like real remorse. But I'd been hurt too deeply to accept apologies easily. Words are a starting point, I said carefully. But I need to see actual changes in behavior. I need to know this isn't just guilt talking. I took a deep breath before continuing, knowing this was my chance to set clear boundaries for any future relationship we might have. I don't know if I can forgive you easily, Melissa. What you did went on for 2 years. You didn't just ignore me, you actively worked to exclude me from family conversations, family photos, family memories. Her face crumpled, but I pressed on. You taught my grandchildren that I was someone to be avoided. You made me dread family gatherings that used to be the highlight of my month. You made me feel unwelcome in my own son's home. I understand, she said quietly. I don't expect immediate forgiveness. I just want the chance to show you that I can do better. Brandon nodded earnestly. What can we do, Mom? How can we make this right? I'd thought about this question during the long months of isolation. I need to see consistent effort, not just words. I need to see that you value my presence in this family. I need to see that my grandchildren are encouraged to have a relationship with me, not steered away from me. You'll have that, Melissa promised. I want to build a real relationship with you, not the fake politeness I've been hiding behind. And I need Brandon to stop making excuses when problems arise, I added, looking directly at my son. I need you to be aware of family dynamics instead of assuming everything is fine. Deal, he said immediately. I studied both of their faces, looking for signs of sincerity or hidden resentment. What I saw was exhaustion, regret, and what appeared to be genuine commitment to change. I'll give you a chance to prove that things can be different. But this is your one chance. The first test of their commitment came 2 weeks later at Kelly's birthday dinner. I almost declined the invitation, but Brandon called personally to ask me to come and promised that things would be different. I arrived with cautious optimism and was immediately struck by Melissa's changed demeanor. Instead of the polite smile I'd grown to dread, she greeted me with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Helen, I'm so glad you came. Kelly was worried you might not feel comfortable coming yet." The conversation felt stilted at first. We were both clearly trying too hard to be normal. But when Alex ran up to show me his new comic book, Melissa encouraged him to tell me all about the story instead of redirecting his attention elsewhere. During dinner, she made a point of including me in conversations about family vacation plans and asked my opinion about restaurants in the area we were considering. It wasn't perfect, there were still moments of awkwardness, but it was a clear effort. The biggest surprise came when Melissa showed me the photos she'd taken during dinner. "I realized I never include you in pictures," she said. "Would you mind if we took a few with the whole family?" Standing there with my arm around my daughter-in-law while Alex and Sophie grinned beside us, I felt the first genuine happiness I'd experienced at a family gathering in over 2 years. The healing process had begun, but I remained cautiously optimistic about whether the changes would last. The evening ended with Melissa asking if I'd like to meet for coffee the following week, just the two of us. For several weeks, the improvement in our relationship continued. Melissa made visible efforts to include me in family conversations, and the grandchildren began approaching me more naturally again. But old habits die hard, and I found myself watching for signs that she was slipping back into her previous patterns. The first red flag came during a family barbecue at Brandon's house. I was telling a story about Sophie's first steps when Melissa's phone rang. Instead of letting it go to voicemail during our conversation, she answered it and spent 10 minutes discussing work schedules with a colleague. When she hung up, the conversation had moved on to other topics, and my story was forgotten. It seemed like a small thing, but it felt familiar, the subtle dismissal disguised as something more important taking priority. I told myself not to read too much into it, but doubt began creeping back in. A week later, I arrived at Alex's school play to find the family sitting together in a row with no seat saved for me. When I approached, Melissa looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Oh, Helen. I didn't know you were coming. Let me find you a chair." The oversight could have been innocent, but combined with the phone call incident, it felt like a pattern emerging. Was she genuinely changing, or just better at hiding her exclusion? I wanted to believe in the progress we'd made, but I'd been hurt too deeply to ignore warning signs. The uncertainty was almost worse than the open hostility had been. At least before, I'd known where I stood. Now I was constantly analyzing interactions and questioning my own perceptions again. I decided the ultimate test would be Brandon's company Christmas party, a formal event where Melissa would want to make a good impression on his colleagues and their spouses. If she truly respected me as family, she would include me naturally. If her recent changes were just performance for Brandon's benefit, this would reveal her true feelings. I spent extra time getting ready, choosing my best dress and jewelry. I wanted to look like someone who belonged, someone worthy of respect and inclusion. When I arrived at the hotel ballroom, I spotted Brandon and Melissa immediately. She looked stunning in a red cocktail dress, and they were already engaged in animated conversation with several couples. My heart started pounding as I approached their group. This was the moment of truth. Would Melissa welcome me warmly and introduce me as Brandon's mother, or would I get the polite smile and eventual exclusion I'd endured for so long? "Helen." Melissa's face lit up when she saw me. "Everyone, I'd like you to introduce Brandon's mother, Helen. She's the one I was telling you about who volunteers at the Literacy Center downtown." She had been talking about me to Brandon's colleagues? Positively. The warmth in her voice seemed genuine, and she immediately made space for me in the conversation circle. Throughout the evening, she included me in discussions, asked my opinions on topics, and even shared a funny story about something I'd taught her about gardening. When someone complimented her earrings, she mentioned that I'd helped her pick them out during our recent shopping trip. For the first time in years, I felt valued and respected at a family-related event. As the evening progressed, I watched Melissa carefully for any signs that her inclusiveness was forced or temporary. Instead, I saw something I'd never witnessed before, genuine pride in introducing me to people and obvious comfort with my presence beside her. When the conversation turned to holiday traditions, she asked me to share the story about the Christmas ornament tradition I'd started when Brandon was little. She listened with apparent interest and even added details about how she and Brandon were continuing the tradition with Alex and Sophie. The most surprising moment came when one of Brandon's colleagues mentioned having difficulties with his elderly mother. Melissa immediately spoke up, "You should talk to Helen about that. She has such wisdom about family relationships, and she's helped me understand my own mother so much better." I was stunned. Not only was she publicly acknowledging my value, but she was crediting me with helping her in her other relationships. This wasn't just politeness, this was genuine respect and affection. During the drive home, I found myself actually looking forward to our next family gathering instead of dreading it. The transformation seemed real, sustained, and rooted in authentic change rather than guilty obligation. When Melissa hugged me goodbye at the end of the evening, she whispered, "Thank you for giving us another chance. I know I didn't deserve it." "Everyone deserves a chance to grow," I replied, and for the first time in months, I meant it completely. 6 months have passed since that difficult conversation in the coffee shop, and our family looks completely different now. Melissa and I meet for lunch every few weeks, sharing stories about the kids and discussing everything from recipes to relationship advice. She's become the daughter-in-law I'd always hoped for, someone who values my experience and genuinely enjoys my company. The grandchildren have returned to their natural, affectionate behavior around me. Alex proudly shows me his homework and asks for help with projects. Sophie runs to me with the same enthusiasm she shows everyone else she loves. The wariness in their eyes has been replaced by the joy I remembered from their early years. Brandon has also changed, becoming more attentive to family dynamics and more appreciative of my role in their lives. He makes a point of including me in family decisions and often calls just to check in and see how I'm doing. The healing hasn't been perfect. There are still moments when old insecurities surface or when we have to work through misunderstandings. But the foundation of respect and genuine care that we've built makes those challenges manageable instead of devastating. Sometimes I think about that funeral invitation and wonder if I went too far. But then I remember the years of feeling invisible and unwelcome, and I know that dramatic gesture was necessary to break through the polite pretenses that were destroying our family. We're not the same family we were before, we're better. We're more honest, more intentional about inclusion, and more committed to valuing each member's contribution. The funeral invitation marked the death of our old, dysfunctional patterns and the birth of something healthier and more genuine. The ghosts of the past no longer haunt our gatherings, replaced by the promise of a future built on mutual respect and authentic love.